even at the risk of other folks coming, and I'll stop to get them chairs since I see at least a few that are available. Let me make a couple of announcements, then Alan has something to say very briefly. I do have to inform you that I have to leave at 9 o'clock, so normally I go over and I sit around or I stand around and talk with some of you, but tonight I can't do that. So I'm going to have to leave at 9, just so you know. I'm not leaving out of any upset. That's why I'm telling you in advance. Before we start, I want to make 2 special announcements. The first is I want to thank people who have very, very kindly and graciously agreed to sponsor these monthly events, which is a polite way of saying helping us to pay the costs of having them videoed and sending them out and all the rest of the expenses that go with doing this every month. So I want to give these thanks, and I have to apologize because I should have begun this process last month. I didn't, so I want to make sure I compensate and explain to you that last month's monthly economic update, helping to cover the costs of this thing, were provided by Bill and Kathy from Maryland, and I want to appreciate them and ask you all to join with me in a little bit of thank you for their having done that last month. And to show that I have learned my lesson, I also want to thank the sponsor of tonight's monthly update, who was kind enough to do this also, and his name is Will Cooper of San Diego, California. It gives you some idea, I hope, of the fact that the 125 or 150 or whatever it is tonight, I've got to be careful since there's a limit on the wall there about things that we have to be cautious about. So the 125 of you that are here this evening, you are matched by something, and it varies month by month, but something between 70 and 100,000 people around the world see this monthly talk now. It's become quite a thing. We get emails from all over the world, so we know, asking us questions and commentary on this. So I do want to remind everybody who's watching that all the kind folks here, the 125 of you, have all graciously paid $10 to help us defray these costs. And those of you that are watching on the internet through YouTube, etc., you, of course, are not required to pay the $10, since there is no gate you have to pass through. But we are counting on you using the honor system, something that clearly is a very important value here in our country, as you can see, to use the honor system to send in your $10 by going to the website and hitting the donate button and following the ways of doing that. So seriously, do help out if you are benefiting from these monthly programs on the internet. Okay, and then before I turn it to Alan for a moment, I wanted to remind you all that there are 3 organizations that make these monthly events possible. I want to thank each of them in turn. First is the Judson Memorial Church. You are sitting in that church. They very kindly and have for a long time made this space available to us as part of what they understand to be their mission in the community as a church, as a Christian church. The second is the Left Forum. The Left Forum is an annual collection of activists and academics. Where they fit on the political spectrum, you get a hint of that from their name. That was a joke. The Left Forum, the Left Forum. And I am going to announce, it could still change, but I believe we're pretty much set, that the Left Forum this year will be from June 2nd to June 4th, and will take place at the John Jay College of the City University of New York, where it has been the last 2 or 3 years. I will confirm that at next month's meeting. You may hear about it sooner, but that's pretty likely going to be where we are and when this occurs. Okay, and the third organization is Democracy at Work. And Democracy at Work is an organization that I work with closely, that literally produces these monthly events, and that has now graduated from being an organization that produces audio and video and written work, sends me around the country all the time, has produced the radio program that I do on a weekly basis, but now has something new, which is because of the enormous response we're getting, which is literally overwhelming us, we are now organizing groups around the United States and indeed abroad of people who want to begin to make change based on the kinds of things we talk about here. Very heartening to us. We have now 13 of them in the United States. The latest one, I want to welcome them in Phoenix, Arizona, which, given how it voted, is interesting too. So before I launch into this evening's discussion, and beginning, of course, with the remarkable events of the last 24 hours, well, I thought I was very clever when we prepared the announcement for tonight's meeting by carefully writing it so that it wouldn't be clear who was going to win, since we didn't know at the time that those announcements went out. So now we do know, and since this is a program about economics, I am not going to talk about all the other dimensions of what happened in the vote and Trump's victory. I'm going to talk about the economic dimension. That's not because I don't think the others are relevant and have a role to play, but it's because the economic one is getting less attention than I think it ought to, and I, for one, happen to believe it's a very important part of this story, and likely to get lost if we don't demand that people pay some attention to it. Okay, what is the economics of what just happened? Well, let's go from the superficial then and get deeper. The estimates of what Mrs. Clinton spent, both of the money raised by the campaign and by associated groups, is somewhere between $800 million and $1 billion, possibly a bit more. The amount of money spent by Trump is less than half of that. So let that sink in. Trump is a novice to political activity. He really doesn't know much about political operations. He's not married to a person who has been through this once before and knows exactly how the game is played. Mrs. Clinton had every conceivable advantage, knowing how the system works, working at it for all these years from a position of enormous power, either as the president's wife or as senator here from New York. She had all the contacts, all the relationships, all the IOUs that she had built up by helping everybody else. Trump didn't. She could present herself as reasonable and present him as a lunatic, and he couldn't play that game in reverse. So with the most money, the most connections, the most experience, and the most IOUs from the political system, she was defeated. And so the first thing I have to suggest to you is that the economics of running for office, all of which were in her favor, weren't enough to overcome something else that was pushing against her. And I want to ask and answer with you what that something else might have been. And the preponderance of the media, the big businesses in our country, were also on her side, with many examples of newspapers and so on that normally endorse Republicans, choosing this time not to do that, but to support her. I'm not aware of a single example of the other way. So she had the money, she had the history, she had the experience, she had the connections, and she had the media. And she was defeated. This is an extraordinary in American politics, just already at that level. The next, take it a little bit deeper. As best I can tell, and I'm looking at the same materials that all of you are that are trying to figure out what happened, as best I can tell, Mrs. Clinton made a conscious decision, with her advisors, I presume, to associate herself with Barack Obama, to associate herself with the prior regime of her husband, Bill Clinton, and therefore to embrace, not walk away from, the notion that she would be more of the same. Oh yes, a little different here and there, but even the differences kind of had to be squeezed out of her by Bernie Sanders' critiques from the left, and one would wonder whether she would have even made those relatively modest moves, criticizing the TPP and so on, had it not been for the extraordinary success of Bernie Sanders' effort. So she was more of the same. And Trump was a big, fat difference. I don't mean that quite the way it sounded, but I'm okay with it anyway. He made a big difference. He was new, he was different. He wasn't a career politician. He'd never been in any office before. He wasn't hooked up. In fact, the Republican Party in which he ran had an awful lot of people who said very nasty things about him week after week and month after month. He was not well connected, didn't have any IOUs. You get the picture. He had one thing going for him. He was something new, something different. And his appeal, I would argue to you, to the American people, was exactly that. I am an outsider from the political game, and I bring you a big change. And I want you to have hope that the big change I bring will be to your benefit. And if you picked up the words hope and change, they should remind you of something. That 8 years ago, this game exactly was played in reverse. Then we had a sitting president, Mr. Bush, who was represented as part of an old family. He was the son, the father had been there before. It's kind of close to the husband had been there before. The father, the Bush family, governor of Texas. All they was more of the same. And Obama came in and said, vote for me because I am different. He didn't have to explain that a lot. One look at him and you knew he was different from anything this country had ever voted into high office like that before, because he was black. So he didn't have to make a big thing about his difference. That was clear. He was different, and he was bringing hope and change. And you know, if you go back earlier, lots of politicians running for president for the last 30 years have argued, I'm an outsider, I'm not really part of the Beltway, I am change, I am different, I am new, I won't do to you what has been done to you for the last 35 years. And let me now take it another level. What is it that has happened to people over 35 years as they kept voting for somebody who was an outsider and who was different and who would bring hope and change? The big word here is change. This was kept going on, and it was promised. And meanwhile, over the last 30 to 40 years, what do we know economically? The gap between rich and poor in this country widened literally every year. The level of wages went absolutely nowhere. No increase in wages. The only way to increase your standard of living was either to make more people in the household go out and work, which a lot of families did, or to borrow money like there's no tomorrow, and then to develop all the anxieties with worrying whether you can repay all these loans. Which means the working class became further distant from the rich and powerful, became more and more money-driven, more and more anxious about their economic situation. Every statistic shows pensions down in terms of what confidence you can have when you get old. Benefits down. Job security down. Benefits of all kinds down. Public services cut back, particularly after 2008, when the economic crash bankrupted cities and towns, and they were cutting back on teachers and road maintenance and everything we now talk about as the need to redo our infrastructure. So for 40 years, the American mass of working people feeling their conditions shrinking, being squeezed, deteriorating. For the young people, It's the explosion over the last 30 years of an enormous overhang of debt in order to get a college education, at the same time that reality teaches them that a college education is less of a guarantee for a good job and a good income than it ever was. You're borrowing like crazy for something that's deteriorating in value as you accumulate the debts to buy it. That's going to eat at you, whether you're conscious of it or not. And the families that are trying to help those kids get through school, themselves going into debt. There's this wonderful statistic over the last 20 years that student debt has risen faster than every other kind and has now surpassed credit card debt. That is, the total amount of money borrowed for students is greater than the total amount of money borrowed by the entire population for credit card usage. But the mystery dissolves once you discover that because the student debt is cheaper than the credit card debt, millions and millions of American families arrange for their students to borrow the money ostensibly for the school, but it's actually a substitute for the credit card debt because it doesn't carry as high an interest rate. People are rational and figured that out. So you have 30 to 40 years of deterioration. Of course, the American people are looking for something to change. What's going on, the fixed story, is getting worse and worse. Nor does it seem to matter whether there's a Republican in the president's seat or a Democrat. The rate of change in a bad direction may change, but the direction doesn't change. It's just the rate. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So more and more, the mass of people turn to somebody who's different. The horrible legacies of racism in this country were, in a peculiar way, overcome when millions of white workers in 2008 crossed that divide and voted Obama into office. Many of those people, it's one of the results of checking the counties in the Midwest of the United States, many of those people who voted for Obama in 2008 voted for Trump this time. That's not about racism. We know that because of what those people did 8 years ago. And they saw that Obama was different, and they hoped for change. But they didn't get it. Obama didn't deliver hope and change. Neither did any of the others that preceded him. And so there was a deepening sense in the American people, and why shouldn't there be? A sense of betrayal. One after another of these clowns, Republican, Democrat, white by and large, and now one black, promising that as outsiders, as different, as new, as committed, and then nothing fundamentally changes. I don't want to pick on Obama, but he's the last one of the last 8 years, so we have to tell the story. Inequality is worse than it was 8 years ago in this country. The wars he promised to end, we're still fighting in 5 countries, if not more, even ones that we weren't at the time that he became president. The tension with Russia, for those of you who pay attention, is scary. NATO has an alert. The troops are massing in that part of the European theater where this would have. Countries in Europe are scared because if there's trouble, it'll be fought there, not here, et cetera, et cetera. So where's the change? The job situation isn't improving. For those of you who watch the statistics and you read that unemployment is down, I've gone through this. I'll do it one more time. There are 2 things to keep in mind. First, at least half of the improvement is not because people without work got jobs. It's because people without work stopped looking for jobs. And when you stop looking, the government does not count you as unemployed. To be counted as an unemployed person in the United States, the way the government does this, and it's always done it, it's not a new thing, is it asks you, are you working? If you answer yes, I'm working, you're employed. If you answer no, I'm not working, you are asked the second question. Are you looking for work? If you answer yes, you're counted as an unemployed person. If you answer no, you're not considered to be in the labor force. and you're not counted. Which means if millions of people, and this is what has happened in the last 10 years, if millions of people who have no job stop looking for it, give up, unemployment goes down because they're no longer considered the unemployed. Half of the improvement since the depths of 2009 and 10 is that story. The other half is people who are getting a job, but it's a part-time job, and or it's a job at much lower pay, much fewer benefits, et cetera, than the job they once had. Therefore, the deterioration of their life continues because they've gone from a good, secure job to a crappy, insecure job, and they know it as deeply as if they were unemployed. There's no escaping from it. Okay, so now we have the latest one to come, Mr. Trump. How does he show he's different? Well, he sure doesn't show it with his wealth. He's ostentatious, he's a billionaire, can't do it that way. His way of doing it, he can't show his skin color. It's the Caucasian variety, as best I can tell. He's creative with color, as you can tell, so I don't know. But I'm guessing. So how is he going to be different? And the answer is he's got to be, in some obvious way, outrageous, crazy, wild, extreme. He's got to show you that there's some reason for you to believe that he's a change, that he's different. He does it first with the Republicans, remember? All the people who had more money than him to begin with and much more credentials. Bush, the governor of Florida, and some of the others. He savaged them. He called them nasty names. He violated all the rules of political protocol. He had clever one-liners that we all remember, that were put-downs, plays on their physical qualities, on their mental qualities, on whatever he could imagine. And of course, you know, whatever he attacked in them, he made sure we all understood was large and abundant in him. If you need that explained to you, I can't do that in public, but you can guess, okay? By the way, there's an analogy to what Trump did to the Republicans. There was a person on the other side who was also different. Sanders comes out of nowhere. A tiny state, no disrespect to my viewers in Vermont, a tiny state with 2 senators and 1 representative at last I looked. The only man in the Senate who calls it, I believe the only one, who calls himself an independent, and certainly the only one who accepts the label socialist, a kind of instant political suicide in America for the last half century. He steps forward and talks all the kinds of things that everybody understands that's a change. He gets up and he says, I will attack the big banks. I will attack the big corporations. They're the problem. They don't like me, and they're right. They shouldn't, because I am going to get them. But wow. Politician. That's new and that's different. The Democratic Party establishment believed that he would get 2 to 3% of the vote. The same threat they felt that they faced with Jill Stein. Tiny percentage wouldn't make enough of a difference. They completely misunderstood the situation. Before it was over, he came real close. If I have the numbers right, 13 million people in the primaries voted for Bernie Sanders. He defeated her in a number of contest states. That should have been a sign. The people who can make the case, I'm different, is almost all you have to do, and suddenly politics changes. Clinton was just barely able to suppress the challenge to her as more of the same from Mr. Sanders, who was different. But she didn't learn the lesson. She then had to discover that what Trump did to the Republicans, he could do to her because he could see from the Bernie Sanders how vulnerable to this she was. She was more of the same to a population that had no tolerance for that at all. A population that wants higher wages, not lower. More job security, not less. More benefits at work, not fewer. More free public higher education, not more debts, etc., etc. Not more war, less war. Not more cuts in public services, more public services. Overwhelming in the country. So what happened? Mr. Trump was able to present himself as a better bet for change than Mrs. Clinton, which wasn't difficult. She made it relatively easy. This wasn't an election about Mr. Trump's horrific behavior about women or about immigrants. It was about basic change. I'm going to make it happen for you. You've been left out, you've been left behind, you've been betrayed repeatedly by these Republicans and Democrats. I'm something different. I'm not scrounging around for money the way the Clintons do. I don't need it. I already have it. Vote for me. I'm less corruptible than them because I corrupted myself earlier and have more money. I don't need to do it now at your expense. I already took care of that by generations of tenants, if you know his history and his family's history, much of it here in New York. So here we have an election in which the American people, in large numbers, vote for change. They're not voting for Mr. Trump's policies. Nobody has any clear idea what they are, him included. We could get into long discourses about the policies we think he may endorse. But that was smart of him. Don't get into that. Don't get yourself confused with the details that most people don't pay attention to anyway. People who are betrayed over and over again in politics, you know what they do? They turn off. They don't pay attention to these races until the last 2 weeks when they kind of begin to notice by the flood of information, oh yes, that's coming up, what am I going to do? And then they make a judgment based on a general notion that comes out of their lives. And they voted for Mr. Trump. Well, what can we say about it? A number of things. First, the liberals, the Clinton liberals, and indeed lots of liberals, they made the following mistake over the last 30 years, which they never admit. I don't think they'll admit it now either. They thought they could make themselves in power forever by saying to the mass of people, vote for us because we are not going to do it to you as badly as those Republicans do. Vote for us. We're not as bad as that. They're going to really sock it to you. We won't. We won't sock it to you that much. The deterioration you're suffering will slow down. We'll give you some offsets. We'll do a few things to make the downturns less painful. And that's all we have to do. We don't need to be left-wing Democrats, the New Deal, what came out of the coalitions of the 1930s. We don't have to. We got rid of those. That's the new center of the Democratic Party that was represented by the Clintons and all the people they gathered around them. We don't need that anymore. It's not necessary. The American people will choose between Republicans who are really going to stick it to the mass of working people and we who won't stick it that badly, or at least not that quickly. That's enough. We'll win. Sometimes it worked. Typically when it worked, the Democrats, the liberals who got into office, quickly discovered that they neither could nor would, nor in many cases even wanted to make any of the basic changes. They didn't think they had to. The problem was the mass of people became more and more disengaged from them because they didn't. They were convinced that the mass of people had nowhere else to go. I mean, either Democrat, which isn't so bad, or Republican, which is worse. So as long as you're a little bit better than the Republicans, you win. You get all their votes. You don't. Because what you're doing is you're creating in your own ranks a mass of people who, if they see a chance for something that might really change, will go there. Those are the people who voted for Obama 8 years ago and voted for Trump yesterday. They didn't think about it. They didn't think it was necessary. And they took the Democratic Party down an ever-worsening dead end. And Obama didn't learn the lesson either. Not that anybody else did. I don't want to pick on him, but he didn't learn it either. And what did the Republicans figure out? They figured out we've got a perfect game here. We're going to appeal to all the social conservatives, you know, people for whom religion is a very important, fundamentalist type of religion is very important, people for whom abortion is murder, and all of that. You all know that. You don't need me to tell you about that. The Republicans will go after them. It will make an alliance, which it did, between those people and everybody in this society who can be convinced that the biggest danger to you is the government. Not your employer, not the company that provides you with the food and clothing that you wear, that is killing you. Not the companies, not the corporate culture, not the economy, the politicians. The government is the bad thing. And we Republicans are going to squash the government, reduce the government, limit the government, get the government off your back. And in this building of a coalition of the anti-government mentality and the social conservatives, the Republicans always had an enormous assist. And the enormous assist comes, sad to say, from the academic intelligentsia of the United States, which lives in this world of a good citizen and a bad government and will not give it up for anything. That's why Americans who lose their job when an employer fires them immediately become angry at the senator who didn't even know it happened, who's got absolutely nothing to do with it. The people who are pushed out of their home because they can't cover their mortgages are angry at the mayor or the congressperson. What? What a wonderful thing for capitalism. You kick the people and they're angry at somebody else. You kick them again, they're more angry at somebody else. They get so angry they vote them out and bring in the next one who does the same thing. The Republicans get that. Attack the government, gather the social conservatives, and the last leg, that's all it is, 3 steps. Pander to corporations and the rich. Cut their taxes, give them every benefit, deregulate them. And when the conditions of the mass of people get worse, you blame the government. Or the loss of Christian values. That solves your problem and brings together your coalition. They thought they had that made. That was a recipe that worked for them over and over. It worked for Bush. It works for Rubio, who got reelected. It works for Ted Cruz. They're specialists in all of this. Trump made them look ridiculous. It didn't work. He was too much of a change, and they were too caught up in this old Republican game that people feel betrayed by. Yes, conservatives feel betrayed too. That's why they abandoned Mr. Cruz and his preacher father. They abandoned Mr. Rubio. I don't have the adequate words to describe his virtues, and then again, it would be a short conversation. But in the case of Mr. Trump, here he is, I'm different. I'm not like these people. For a population that's betrayed and bitter, that's gone through 30 years of decline with nothing coming down the pike to indicate one whit of improvement, any change is acceptable. And Mr. Trump wasn't scary for most of them, because they don't find any of this relevant, mostly, to their lives. Well, is it all bleak? Some of your faces suggest that you think so. Let me tell you why I don't think so, okay? Mr. Trump will be no more able to change the basic conditions of the capitalism that afflicts the American people than any of his predecessors were. Not one bit. There's nothing in his history, nothing in his programs that indicate. Could he develop it? Sure, I can't predict the future any better than anybody else can. But why anyone in their right mind should imagine that this man, by virtue of his election, is going to raise wages where they've been falling, improve job security where it has been declining, get the students out of their debts? Stop. Nothing. There's no reason to expect any of it. Which means that Mr. Trump is setting himself up for exactly the same betrayal that people feel about Obama and about all the people before Obama. He's in line to do the same thing. There are wisecracking Democrats in Washington, the few that have a sense of humor, who are telling the Clintons, it's good that you lost, because the economic downturn that's coming, and I'm going to talk to you more about that, is now going to be his problem. It would have been your problem. And the truth of it is, these Democrats know the Clintons haven't a better clue what to do than does Mr. Trump. So the irony is, here is also an opportunity for what? Well, the candidate who comes out best at the end of all this carnage, all the nasty things Clinton said about Trump, all the nasty things Trump said about Clinton. You know who looks whiter than white, if I can abuse the metaphor? Bernie Sanders. There's nothing that's clinging to him that looks or smells like what clings to the others. He looks wonderful. He comes out clean. That's a very important thing, because that lesson is slowly percolating through the culture. And it carries implications that are going to be played out in the months and years ahead. Here's the second opportunity. It's possible for us, and by here I mean the broad left, and I don't usually talk like that because the broad left, for most of my, there's no symbolism involved here. There's none. Purely electronic event. He's not president yet. We have a chance as a left, now that we are much larger and know ourselves to be larger, now that we have shown that 13 million Americans will vote for somebody who says, yeah, I'm a socialist. Granted, he's the most moderate socialist one can imagine. Although there are now Europeans trying to out-moderate him. And succeeding. The French come to mind right away, but we'll come back to that. There is now, I think, an opportunity to say, if the left can get its act together, that the problem here is a capitalism that has been no good for the majority of people for 40 years. That's our problem. Changing our leaders has made no major difference in that basic story. So changing them again from an Obama to a Trump, or from a Trump to whoever the next one is, that's not a solution. We don't have to make that case. That's not very hard to make. People already get that. That'll be easy. Well, then what do? We've got to change the economic system so it isn't driven by huge wealthy corporations that have the incentive and the resources to keep moving in the direction that has produced the deterioration for the last 40 years. And it's a very easy deterioration to describe. It's automation and it's relocation. Those are two words. Replacing workers with machines, above all the computer, and now the computerized robot. That's one. And moving production to cheap wage countries around the world is number two. There go the jobs, there goes the ability of the working class to get a decent standard of living, there goes a decline that is everywhere visible. And if it hasn't hit you personally yet it will. There it is. And that's not going to be changed until you reorganize the decision-making apparatus. The decision to move a plant from here to there. The decision to destroy these jobs and replace them with robots and tell the people whose jobs have been replaced, you're on your own, get lost, go work, become a greeter at Walmart if you're lucky, or flip hamburgers. That's it, you're done. This society has no obligation towards you, no place for you, no understanding of what the impacts on your family, friends, neighbors, none of it. We're free to screw you every which way, as we have been doing. An alternative to that, an economic system built in a different way, giving the power of making these decisions to the mass of people and not to private capital, that's our only way out of this. If we do it, we build the basis for what? We build the basis for a new political party. Because such a movement to change the economy has to have a political expression. It has to have an agency that goes around and explains to everybody else what it's doing and why it's doing it. Because the support will be there if we do it. This will be a political party whose goal is to reduce the footprint of capitalism in our economy and to raise the footprint of an alternative system, which you can call worker co-ops, which I do, or worker self-directed enterprises, or a different way of organizing production so that people together democratically decide what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits. That solves our problems, and you need a political party that will advocate for that kind of change. And by doing that, we'll show that the Republicans and Democrats are advocates for the continuation of capitalism. They just differ on exactly how to do it. The Republicans more aggressive and stick it to the working class, the Democrats not as bad. But two parties that are two wings of the same economic commitment means you don't have any real choice unless another party comes along, which is another argument for its emergence. We are strong enough to do that now. Occupy showed us a beginning. Bernie showed us an enormous step forward. I'm very impressed in recent weeks that the Black Lives Matter movement is taking more and more interest in these economic questions and taking position. So there's another leg, signs. And all of this amidst the deterioration of capitalism, which is what I'm going to turn to for the rest of my talk. But we have an opportunity here. It is not just a defeat. The biggest defeat suffered here is by the establishments of the two major parties who really have taken it on the chin. It's their own fault. I'm not asking any of you to have any sympathy with them at all. They don't deserve it. They eagerly pushed every critical impulse out. Eagerly. For them, the left has been irrelevant, marginal, dismissible, contemptible. That's how they react. Nor do I think this Trump defeat of them will teach them much. I think they're beyond it. They've been doing this for too long. They're too deep into this rut. They're going to continue doing it. And as I begin to read the interpretations of Trump's victory, you can already see how they're interpreting it as being, we're not going to give it up. For example, the interpretation, this is all about racism, or this is all about immigration, or this is all about grabbing women's genitals. Horrible as all those parts of this game were, they're not what this game is fundamentally about. And it's a mistake to go in that direction because it loses us the sense of where we can go to change this. All right, let me turn then to some of the more usual events that I want to make you aware of, because you seem to like this, and so I do this because I get good responses from audiences when I do. Things that happened since the last month we were here. that are about economics and that I think you should know about. The first one has to do with two countries, Iceland and France. Iceland is an interesting country for many reasons, other than the fact that it's cold. It has the lowest gap between men and women's wages of any country. That is, women get roughly 14% less pay for the same work as men do. The comparable number here in the United States is 20%. It's much worse. The Icelandic women, who have fought hard over the years to get this, are still not satisfied. 14%, they argue, is exactly 14% too much. They added it up to measure it, and they said, we work a number of weeks a year, but because we get paid less than men, if we got the same that men got, we wouldn't have to work those weeks. So we're kind of working for free. So the Icelandic women created a holiday, which is celebrated in Iceland. It's the 24th of October. That's since last we met. That's why I couldn't tell you about it before. And on the 24th of October, they walk out of the job. They figure out what part of each day they're working for free, and they leave at that hour. So in this last 24th of October, thousands and thousands of women walked out of the job at 2:38 in the afternoon on the 24th as a protest and a demand for their politicians to do something about overcoming this gap. And of course, the word about this got around everywhere. That's why all of you are looking at me as if you never heard of this before, which you probably didn't, and which gives you another deep insight into the quality of the media that you have at your disposal, that you don't know anything about this. However, the word did reach France. And in France, which has a larger gap, not much larger than the Icelandic, they're pretty good, the French, 15% is their number. But on the 7th of November, that's earlier this week, huge number of women walked out of their job at 4:34 in the afternoon to show that they are not going to be left behind by the women of Iceland. And they demand equal pay for equal work. It's important because it's movement. It's movement of masses of people who want to change economic injustice. And that's something we need badly in the world today. And so hat off to the women of Iceland and France. And who knows, given all the people that are going to see what I just said, who knows, maybe some of you will be inspired to read up about this and copy it. Here in the United States, where the discrepancy is much larger and needs the attention. And if I were you, I wouldn't count on President Trump to be in the forefront of efforts to solve this problem. Next item. I don't mean to belabor the poor Volkswagen Corporation, VW, but they are such a delicious target, if you know anything about their history. Volkswagen in German means people's car. Why is it called the people's car? Because it is a project that was begun, if my memory is correct, under the auspices of one Adolf Hitler, in order to make automobiles available to the average German citizen, because when Hitler comes to power, 1933, they weren't. So that's not an auspicious beginning, all things considered. But it really gets delicious over the last year and a half when it turns out, and I'm sure this you do know, because it did get a lot of publicity here in the United States, Volkswagen was caught by a small shop here in the United States. Something to be proud of about American mechanical ingenuity. We did catch them. They had put a device into their diesel cars. They're a big producer of diesel automobiles. They had put a device in there that basically fools the inspection mechanism. If you've ever had your exhaust checked to see what kind of stuff you're pumping into the air, they put a little instrument into your exhaust pipe that measures how much of the bad stuff is coming out. And they put a device in there that would reduce the amount coming out when the inspection was done, but not when you were regularly driving it on the highway. That's a crime. In other words, they reported numbers that they knew to be false and phony, and the reason for that was very simple. By not putting the device in that would have controlled it, they therefore were able to get a quicker acceleration of their car and a zippier drive than other diesel producers who had put the device in. So they could claim, we've solved the diesel problem. You get a diesel and you get the right pollution control, but you still have a zippy car, whereas all those other people have the pollution control, no zip. If I understand correctly, people who buy cars are deeply committed to zip. And so this is important. Well, it was for Volkswagen. And they have now admitted it, so this is not something that's anymore, I don't have to say, alleged or anything like that. This is admitted by them. But they've gotten into more and more trouble. This last 10 days, it turns out that their current chairman of the board, Hans-Dieter Pötsch, can't get a more German name than that, Hans-Dieter Pötsch, turns out to be under suspicion by the government in Germany. And let me tell you, if you're the head of General Motors, one of their biggest companies, for the government to be inspecting you, you must be very, very guilty, because you have 800 ways of preventing that from happening. So we will see how well he does, but this is not a good sign. The two German families, who together control 52% of VW's voting stock. This may come as a shock to some of you, because if you own shares of VW, which you can, they have the following quality. You can't vote those shares. In other words, whatever those shares give you, they don't give you a vote in deciding what the company does. 52% of the voting shares, and companies can do that, and many companies do. They issue one class of shares where you get a vote on who's on the board of directors, etc., and another class of shares where you don't get a vote. And the way that families control a company is they allow lots and lots of non-voting shares to be sold to the public. Of course, you pay money for them, money which they get, but they're the only ones who can vote. The Porsche family, that should come as a familiar name. For those of you who don't know, Porsche owns VW. It's like many of those beers that you buy, that are all owned by the same company, but it keeps lots of different names so that you can be proudly committed to a craft beer that's made in the same Budweiser factory that all the other ones are. I don't mean to pick on Budweiser, but it is enjoyable to do. And the other family is the, I don't know how they pronounce this, Piech or Piech family. Porsche and Piech, the two families, control 52%. They have announced complete confidence in Chairman Hans-Dieter Pötsch. That's another sign that he's got a short life ahead of him. When the two major families express all confidence, they're already working with their lawyers to bring you into a home for elderly people soon. And the other thing that afflicted Volkswagen was the discovery here in the United States, in California, that what had not been known before is now the case. They put these devices into the Audi automobiles as well. And again, for those of you who do not know, Audi, which is a brand of car, is owned by Volkswagen, which is owned by Porsche. You get the picture. Modern capitalism in all of its wonders. Why do I tell you this? Because that shows you that a top corporation, which really is no different from similar corporations anywhere else in the world, here got caught. It got caught producing emphysema and every other lung disease in the world by emitting horrific pollution in millions of its automobiles. By the way, the largest number of automobiles that are deficient in this way, that pump too much pollution, are in Germany. Their deep commitment to the Vaterland didn't extend to not making money off their German compatriots. 400,000 diesels here in the United States, polluting the air. For years, we don't know how many people died of lung disease or of associated ailments because of what those cars were. Until they got caught, it was a holiday. He's in trouble, Mr. Putsch, because he didn't tell the investors in the company when he knew that they were going to be in trouble with foreign governments. It's an obligation of corporations to let their investors know of information that can affect the value of your investment. You're counting on the corporate leader to inform you, since you're the owner by buying shares, and he's your servant. And here the servant is screwing the owner. It's supposed to go the other way. It doesn't work. This is a system that's breaking down. All the rules of who says what to whom, no. This is, as the French call, sauve qui peut. Everyone's on their own here. Grab it before it disappears, or before the person next to you, who you thought was your friend, grabs it first. Next item over the last month for you to deal with. I want to give a shout of recognition and approval to the faculty at the University of Manitoba in Canada, because about 10 days ago, the faculty, 1,200 people, the students at the University of Manitoba, about 29,000, it's a big place, they went on strike, demanding that the classes not be cut down, that the services provided to students not be reduced, that the use of temporary faculty who don't have the same qualifications, who are working 6 jobs, all of that stuff be stopped. 1,200 faculty on strike at the University of Manitoba, enormous student support. The university went on the radio, the officials of the university and radio and television, and proudly announced that 1/3 of the faculty had crossed the picket line, that is, gone back to work under the, violating the strike. Well, I've been a faculty all my life. It would be the greatest thing we could imagine, those of us who tried to form unions, if 2/3 of the faculty that we ever took out on strike stayed out. 1/3 going back is an immense victory of the union, of the workers, because the university can't run with 2/3 of the faculty not there. The union, by the way, disputes that, says it's not even an accurate count, but whatever the numbers, there's no way for me to know that, but if the worst that the administration can say is they got 1/3 to go back and 2/3 are not, you can't run a university with 2/3 of your faculty not working. And the student support for them is enormous. These are people who, in their little way, in their little job, in this little university, in that corner of Canada, are fighting back against what's going on in Canada as it is going on here. The PTT that we're going to see stuff happen, the Canadians just signed the equivalent of the PTT with Europe. The Americans haven't signed it. Canadians, Mr. Trudeau, the great white hope, has already shown you what it is you can expect from those kinds of politicians. But the University of Manitoba is remarkable. Here's another example of a system in deep trouble. And if I had time, I'd give you many. The 20 largest container shipping companies in the world. Nowadays, since the clothing you're wearing and the appliances you use and all come from thousands of miles away, they mostly come on ships that cross the ocean. It's the modern commitment of capitalism to ecology. By having things produced 10,000 miles away, you need lots of fuel to bring them. And you can pump all of the bad air and all of the spent fuel into the ocean, where the fish can eat it and kill us when we eat them. capitalism, to make money, moved production over there. What was their concern about ecology? Well, the technical term would be nothing. But I don't want to take away from any of you that are carefully collecting plastic in a different bag from glass, and that different from your garbage, because you want to do something about. While you're doing that, and it's noble and good, the companies that run this economy are polluting like it's going out of style. They just want to remind you of that. Anyway, when they pollute, they use shipping companies. And the 20 largest companies, 2 of whom have declared bankruptcy in the last 6 months, Hanjin, that some of you know, the Chinese company, and Maersk, the big Danish, I believe Danish or Norwegian. But the 20 biggest companies announced 10 days ago that not a single one of them will make any profit in 2016. It's the worst year they've ever seen. You know what that means, friends? That means that world trade is collapsing. There's not enough trade to fill the ships. They're losing money. They can't make any profit. The top 20, that's it. That's most of the shipping. That is not a good sign. That is a bad sign. That's not good times coming economically. That's bad, real bad. Next, South Korea. South Korea is a remarkable economy. It has grown very fast over the last 30 years. It's almost as impressive as the growth of the People's Republic of China. But it is not led, of course, by a communist party. It is led instead by a handful of enormous corporations. They're called chaebol. I don't know how you pronounce it. Chaebol. Think of it as an enormous conglomerate. If there was a merger of GM, GE, DuPont, Apple, and Google, that would be it. Typically connected by family. Folks marry one another and their cousins, and so on. So the country has been run by these huge corporations and a government that basically organizes the economy for them. They are very hostile to labor unions, tremendous arrests and persecution of people who try to form unions. This society is currently dissolving. There have been massive demonstrations in the streets. I'm sure you've all seen them. No. Why? Because it turns out that the leader of the government has been taking, it's a woman, taking advice from what is now called in Korean circles the Rasputin of South Korea. That's a reference to a monk who was the advisor to the final royal family in Russia before it all came to an end, including Mr. Rasputin, who came to an end along with the royal family there. She has been taking advice from this, I don't know what words to use, this very deeply religious, crazy person. And the government is falling apart, and the mass of people are beginning to rise. The target is the crazy decisions this woman leader has made, but it's actually the expression of the anger. Why? Because South Korea, even more than China, had an economic growth based on exports. Exports that you know under the name, say, Samsung. That's a Korean company. It's one of those chaebols. Okay? Everything is based on exports. The people of South Korea don't get paid real well, work very, very hard in a big industrial country that produces for export. Well, if you keep in mind that the 20 largest shipping companies are not making any money, you will know that they can't export because nobody is buying. Samsung has an extra problem because they developed a special kind of telephone that you can not only use to make calls, but blows up on you when you do. But when you leave things in the hands of these huge monster corporations, you know that efficiency and your safety are their uppermost concerns. And when you hear that, think Samsung, VW, we can continue. These are not exceptions, folks. These are the norm. South Korea is therefore blowing up. And when you hear the next time about the horrors of North Korea and Kim Il, whatever his name is, what you're hearing is things that are a problem in that country. It has its problems. But you're mostly hearing about an attempt to deflect away from what is the real problem, which is a major Asian ally is imploding. And no one here knows quite what to do. If I had more time, I would tell you how the government of the Philippines has decided that the United States is not the ally it thought it was and is heading towards China and Russia as fast as it can go, and making Mr. Putin smile, as he no doubt did after yesterday's election. Okay, let me turn then to the topics that we have time left for. Where is the capitalist system going? Well, let me be as blunt with you here as I know how. The history of capitalism for 300 years, wherever it has come, has been a history that deserves the word instability stamped on its forehead. The system is fundamentally unstable. What does that mean? Every 4 to 7 years on average, the system tanks. What does that mean? Suddenly, large numbers of people are thrown out of work. Large numbers of businesses go bankrupt. Large numbers of businesses cut back production from what it had been. Okay, that sudden bang. Sometimes it doesn't last very long and it doesn't affect too many people. Short and shallow, we say. And sometimes it is very serious. It's long and deep. The one in the 1930s, very long, very deep. The one since 2008, quite long, very deep. Others, shallow and short. But if you assume that the future of capitalism is more or less likely to be the 300 years of capitalism, during which every conceivable effort was made to stop this instability, to prevent it, to overcome it, to shorten it, and you can see the success of it by noticing that we're in one now. So the 300 years of effort to stop it failed. By the way, just again, between the end of the Great Depression, 1941, and the beginning of the one we're in now, 2008, the National Bureau of Economic Research, which is the government agency that monitors these things, counts 11 economic downturns between 1941 and 2008. That's where you get the 4 to 7 year average. Okay, when was the last bottom of the cycle? 2009. Do some arithmetic. 4 to 7, 2009, we're overdue for one, aren't we? Which is why on Wall Street, if you follow the financial press, the assumption is in the next 6 to 18 months, we're going to have a downturn. Well, whoa, we're not out of the 2008 disaster. We've got a level of people with debts they cannot afford to miss a payment on. If we get suddenly millions of people thrown out of work with another downturn, the kind that would come if the shipping companies of the world have no demand to meet by renting out their ships to carry stuff, if the mass of people are not in a mood to spend money, if they can't borrow more because they're already loaded up to here with debt, then we're looking at a situation in the near future when we're going to have an economic downturn in an already fragile economic situation. That's not good, folks. And that doesn't suggest anything is going to happen in this society to undo the inequality that keeps getting worse, to undo the instability, which is about to explode on us again. There's nothing happening to slow down automation. In fact, the use of robots is accelerating in a whole line of productions here in the United States and elsewhere. And ditto, the movement of production out of the United States continues. So we're not seeing any sign of a change or anything that could be happening that would produce a reversal of what has agitated politics in this country so extremely as we now see it. Mr. Trump is going to have his work cut out for him, big time. Handling these problems, trying to deliver on the real demand of the people who voted for him, which is for some real change in their situation. How's he going to do that, given the commitments he's made, given who he is, given who he's going to bring into power? True, he may deflect everybody's attention by saying outrageous things about Mexicans or half the population. Maybe he will. Maybe he'll figure out that deflecting people away from the basic issues that upset them, which is, after all, what the election did for a year, is his best hope to keep the hype going, to keep the circus and the theater going so that people don't. But it didn't work for any of his predecessors to keep doing what they were doing in the hope that whatever got them into office, if they just kept doing it, it would keep them into office. If you noticed anything about the last 5 presidents, by the end of the time of their term, Americans hated them, couldn't wait to get them out. Obama's a little unusual. He didn't have that. People haven't turned against him. But Bush, you remember, the end of Bush's term, at the end of Clinton's term, at the end, they're all, you knows Americans have enough because of that betrayal. But if Mr. Trump thinks he can just ride along like all the others, he will be committing the same mistake that allowed him to get into office. He will not have learned from that at all. And if we add to that an economic downturn that is going to plunge a generation of students with already too much debt, with already too limited job situations, with an even worse one as they emerge out of college, we might begin to see things that make Occupy Wall Street look like a picnic in comparison with the level of accumulated anger. Because we haven't begun to see, we've only seen the mildest forms of upset. Occupy Wall Street was very peaceful, was very low-key. Bernie Sanders' campaign, basically the same. And given what the Black Lives Matter responded to, the slaughter of people by the police, their response has been pretty low-key. That's not likely to continue. At least in the past, that's not the way these things usually go. So let me scare you with one thing. There are, of course, people who are excited about Mr. Trump's gain, who are the David Dukes of this world, the people who have a different political agenda, an old ideological agenda of the sort that you all know and don't need me to tell you about. No one knows how much reliance Trump will put on them, what positions in government he will allow them to have, nor what they will do if they get such positions. But knowing who they are and what they will feel now emboldened to do, my guess is they will be provocative. And my guess is a lot of people, like those in this room, will react. That could spin out of control. That's a whole nother game. Then you have the polarization of the two sides, and Mr. Trump can play the game as if he is bringing them together when in fact he's repressing one in favor of the other. That's an old game too. If I were watching, and which I will be, that's what I will be watching for. And that's what I'll be talking to you about in the months ahead, whether we begin to see signs of that, where they are, and how they are going. But I don't want to end today without leaving you with 2 more insights about what's going on. There is also, because of the difficulties corporations are having, difficulties, and I want to explain the difficulties. In the end, a capitalist system, like any other system, needs all the different parts of it to play their assigned role. Capitalism doesn't work if the mass of workers don't go to work and do the work. If you didn't go, the game is over. You got to go and work, and then you got to go to the mall and buy the fruits of your work. You've got to play both sides of that game, otherwise it doesn't work. But capitalism is a system that is internally messed up, or to use Marx's term, it's contradictory. Every capitalist is always trying to save on labor costs, to get a cheaper worker to replace a more expensive worker, to get a machine to replace any worker, to get a worker to accept lower wages than he or she did before. They're always trying to save on labor costs because it gives them more profits. And then they're always surprised when they discover that the success they've had in cutting down their labor costs, which means they're giving less money to the workers, means, here you go, the workers don't have the money to buy the stuff. What they gain by squeezing their workers, they lose because they've just squeezed their customers. Capitalism can't get out of this dilemma because it's the nature of capitalism. To get out of that dilemma is to give up the capitalism, which, this should come as not a major surprise, the capitalists don't want to do. So they're forever caught in this dilemma. They have no way out. Oh, they can postpone the dilemma. You know how they do that? You all know how they do that. How can they keep you buying even though they're not raising your wages? How can they get you to buy more and more even though they're not paying you to do it? The answer is the plastic in your wallet, debt. You can borrow because that allows you to spend and they don't have to pay you. This is wonderful. Of course you should have 12 credit cards in your wallet. Of course you should borrow for college. Of course you should borrow for your car, your house. Borrow, 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 because it's the capitalist dream. He gets the customers, he doesn't have to pay you anything. In fact, he takes the extra profits made from not paying you, saving on labor. He takes the extra profits, ready? Because if you get this, you'll understand capitalism and you'll become its enemy. He takes the extra profits from not paying the workers and lends it to them so they can buy on credit what he's selling them. You get it? He squeezes you as a worker and then lends you so he can squeeze you as a borrower too. The only thing worse than that reality is the number of American citizens who are grateful for the opportunity. You are complicit in your own screwing, which is not a compliment. So corporations are having trouble. Americans can't buy. Europeans can't buy, not the way they did. They've run out of debt. They can't borrow anymore either. Their wages are going nowhere, and they cannot afford any more debt. That's why we collapsed in 2008. They couldn't afford the debt then. So what's happening? The corporations are getting scared. How are they going to make money if they can't sell anymore? The solution they found, more and more in the last few years, is to make more money by saving on costs, all costs. And the way they do that is called mergers and acquisitions, M&A in the lingo. They buy each other. Then instead of 2 landscaped headquarters of the company, they only need 1. Instead of 2 layers of middle and upper management, they only need 1. They can lay all kinds of people off, they can save all kinds of costs, they can make more money. 4 airline companies do 80% of the airline traffic in this country. The last one was a few years ago. American Airlines, US Air. First proposed by the 2 airlines, opposed by the Obama administration. Within 3 months after the Obama administration announced it was against it, the Obama administration announced a reversal of its position, and it was now for it, which is why we have it. The fact that the mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, lobbied heavily for that reversal and was rewarded, you can't make this stuff up, by big contributions from the heads of the airline companies too. His re-election campaign in Chicago has, of course, nothing to do with it. Mergers everywhere, which of course means that a society already dominated by large corporations is becoming dominated by smaller and larger corporations and fewer of them. You're living in that society. It isn't working real well. That's why they can and will make the kinds of decisions that the biggest monopolist in the automobile industry, basically, VW, indulged itself. It thought it could get away with it, because it probably has gotten away with who knows what for years. But if you think you're safe in an economic system, in a capitalism working like this, it's falling apart. I keep trying to get it across. It's not under control. Nobody has it under control. There's not some solution around the corner. Mr. Trump doesn't have a magic wand any more than Mrs. Clinton or Mr. Obama did or could have had. It's a system spinning out of control, and more people are getting dimly, slowly, because it's scary, the notion that their real options and choices in this life are whether to go down with it. Finally, what's the option? What's the option? Again, there is an option. I learned today of a group of cab drivers in Austin, Texas, 360 of them, who just formed a cooperative taxi business. They were successful in driving Uber and Lyft out of Austin. They were there, they're gone, and in their place is this worker cooperative that has set up in Austin, Texas, to run that business. And that business is attracting worker co-ops quite a bit. Our little organization, Democracy at Work, is working with one in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is likewise trying to set up this kind of business. Why do I talk to you so much about worker co-op businesses? Because it's an alternative to capitalism. It's a way out. It's something to do. It's a direction to take to get out of this mess which is deteriorating and presenting us with the Trumps of this world. You know that Trump is not unique. The establishment in England thought that everybody would vote to stay in Europe. They didn't. It's the exact same story. If I understand correctly, the liberal socialist president of France currently gets an approval rating of 4%, which is an achievement. I don't believe any leader has ever achieved this before. And wow. He's a socialist in the sense he went along with everything. He didn't think there would be anger and upset against going along, saying that at least he's not as bad as the conservatives in France, and he isn't. Just like the Democrats here aren't as bad as the Republicans. They aren't. But we're not at that anymore. That won't work. That won't cut it anymore. It's done. And Mr. Hollande is discovering that, to his sorrow. The Syriza government in Greece is on the edge of discovering the same thing. The Portuguese government, which I believe I've told you is an alliance of the communist, socialist, and green parties. That's the government of Portugal. I'm sure you all knew that, right? That the government of Portugal is a coalition of those three parties, because the press in this country would want you to know that the people of Portugal made that decision in their last election. Yes, they did. They're all worried. They don't know where to go. Let me be so bold. Here is where you go. You develop a worker co-op sector. You say, this is a way for you to have a job where the job and the security and the income are the number one priority, not profit. You're not driven by profit first and everything else later. Profit is second or third or fourth. First is the quality and the quantity of the relationships and the security and the income of your workplace. That's a worker co-op. It's what it's always been designed to be. Build that sector of an economy. Let the people in this society begin to see what that's like, and they'll vote with their feet. That's where they'll go and shop. Just like they now, some of you shop for fair-traded coffee. Wouldn't you shop for something that said made in a worker co-op in a democratically run enterprise rather than a top-down one that uses child labor in Indonesia, etc., etc.? Come on. A democratic enterprise? What an interesting slogan in a country that takes democracy seriously, or says it does. to democratize the enterprise. Make democracy there. Get rid of the autocrats at the top. You know, you could throw the desks into the river and call it a tea party. Why not? Let me close with reminding you of what has been done in a country very like our own, Great Britain. For those of you that I've told this before, bear with me. Britain has two parties like the United States. They're not called Republican Democrat, they're called Conservative and Labor Party. The second party is the Labor Party, sort of like our Democratic Party, and the Conservatives are like our Republicans. The Labor Party has a Bernie Sanders of its own. The man's name is Jeremy Corbyn, C-O-R-B-Y-N. I believe that's how it's spelled, C-O-R-B-Y-N. He has been elected now twice in a year because the center of their party, like the center of the Democratic Party, was very upset with their Bernie Sanders, and so they tried to get rid of him. So they had a second election in the year. He did better in the second election than he did in the first, so they couldn't get rid of him. He's the head of the Labour Party. Why am I telling you this? Because the Labour Party in England has a program commitment. This is what it will do if it wins the election, which is scheduled for 2017 or maybe 18, I don't know, either next year or the year after. Here's the commitment. It will become law, if the Labour Party wins, that any enterprise in England, any enterprise that either contemplates closing or moving out of the country or becoming a public company in the sense of issuing shares, a public offering, any company that plans to do any of those things will be required by law to give their own workers the right of first refusal to buy the company. That the company cannot close, cannot move, and cannot sell itself to any other company, that's another thing, can't do that, without first giving the workers the right to take the place over and run it as a worker co-op. Only if the workers refuse will the company be free to explore those other options. Plank number 2, the government pledges to provide the money to enable the workers to buy the company in order to create in England a worker co-op sector of the economy. And for those of you who don't know, such a sector of a capitalist economy already exists. Spain has it through the Mondragon experiment, and Emilia-Romagna, that district of the state inside Italy, also has that. So we already have examples of it. We have the examples, we know how to do it, we know where it's been done, we have the expert, we can do this. There's only the political will in this country to advance such a program and to go to the people and say, this is a way out of a 40-year deterioration that is punctuated by the lunacy of these election campaigns. I have to leave, I can't stay. Thank you very much, and I hope I see you again in December.